Hey everybody, good afternoon. This is Katie again at Kentucky Hemp Works. We are back with another of our wonderful episodes of Hemp Homeschool. I refer to them as episodes in my head, so just like Netflix. I'm on episode 24 today, and we continue to get a lot of questions about vocabulary and different terminology that's used in cannabis. And there are some terminologies that are really only used in that particular sense for cannabis. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about some of those. There is the list, the vocabulary list that Tanya posted earlier. That's what I'm going to go over today. And I've got some examples of everything. I don't have everything. We'll have to use our imagination on a couple of things, but I should be able to show everybody what it is. So I guess just start from the top here. When we first started the Hemp Homeschool lessons, I started from the bottom of the plant and worked up. We started with talking about the roots, and then the stalk, and then the leaves and the seeds, and then went into what you could use for everything. So I kind of line these up the same way to try to keep them almost together in little categories, but everything is the same category, so you almost can't do that. But the first thing that we had talked about was roots, and I talked about how sailors and in ship making that the oakum was used to patch holes in ships, and not just patch holes, but like when you're building the ship and you have those gaps that form in between the wood and things like that, they would use all kinds of plant-based materials to patch up those holes and make it seaworthy. So it wasn't just that they just used the hemp roots either. They were really using any kind of waste product from the cannabis plant. So if they had leftover stalk material, anything that was going to dry and kind of have those natural glues in there, they would just mash them up and kind of pound them in there, and then those actually serve to just patch those holes up and to keep the water out. But it wasn't just the roots, and it was any of that leftover material. I mentioned it on the roots lesson because it was, roots are a common waste product when you're not using them for salves and skincare and things like that. It's something that's very common because obviously they're just going to be there. So roots, definitely one of my favorite parts of the plant. Probably my favorite out of all of them because the roots are very under-researched. We just don't have enough research on them, and I think that people are starting to kind of catch up to the uses, but I feel like the further back in history we go, the more we're going to find out about roots. So the next one is bast fiber. So as you're moving up the plant, the bast fiber it's a common term. This is common among lots of different plant materials. It's not just hemp, but the bast fiber is typically the fibers that run on the inside of the skin of the plant. So when you look at hemp, and it sort of looks like bamboo, it's got little nodes on it, but you can peel this skin, this outer skin. I don't know how well you can see that. It's not really important, but what you need to know is that you can peel that skin off of the plant, and the wood on the inside goes by several names, which we'll get to, like hurd or cellulose. And then the bast fiber is going to be on the inside of the skin. So with hemp, it seems like almost all of it is bast fiber here. There's a very little bit of bark on the outside of it, but even the bark is practically fibrous too. So any of these waste products could be used as oakum because if you're looking for long, strong fibers to make clothing, all you have are little chunks. There's lots of other things that you can do with that fiber. So I will skip down to hurd because that's kind of what I'm talking about here. The hurd, once you take that fiber off and you peel that away, and that's called decortication. Probably should have put that on there. But when you decorticate or you separate the fiber from the stalk or the cellulose, we call this the hurd. And that's H-U-R-D, not H-E-R-D or H-E-A-R-D or, but anyway, the hurd can be, that's another definition that can be used in different kinds of plants as well. So like this is the inner woody core of the hemp stalk. So on this core, you are going to see things called nodes. And those nodes, I actually am holding a node right here, but this is one that I didn't really have a good picture of or a way to show it here at the shop. I got a couple of pictures that might work, but this is also something that's very easy to see, so you can Google pictures of hemp fiber plants or whatever. You just want to see a picture of the stalk of the hemp plant. But basically on that stalk, you're going to have sections sort of like bamboo. And those sections are going to be cut off by a little line, and that spot right there is called a node. Now, wherever you have a node, you're going to have branching right on that spot. So if you have a fiber crop and it's growing very tall very quickly, those fibers in between each node are going to grow very long. And you're going to have a lot of spacing in between each node. Then every time you have one of those nodes, you'll have a little bit of branching, and maybe on a fiber crop, just a small amount of leaves. In fact, some of those leaves might just die off early and fall off, and that way the plant can put its energy into continuing to grow taller, producing more long fibers, and then another node with some more branching. And then of course, close to the top of the plant, you'll have more nodes, more branching, and then eventually a seed head, and we talked about all that stuff. But anyway, so each one of those little segments is cut off by a line called the node. So that's the end of that segment. And really what makes a good fiber crop is that you have a lot of spacing in between those nodes. You want to have long fibers, and each one of those segments, that is, from the top of that segment to the bottom of that segment is one long fiber. So each one of those cells is one long fiber strand, and it's going to reach from node to node. Then you're going to have a cutoff, and on the next segment you have a new fiber that goes. So if you want the longest, strongest fibers, you want to have a lot of spacing in between your nodes. Not so much hurd, because you're looking for fiber. You want the plant to put its energy into growing tall and not growing real big and making a whole lot of this wood. And then you get a lot of bast fiber and potentially oakum. So anyway, okay, so we did oakum, bast fiber, nodes, hurd, and cellulose. So cellulose is another, is really, we're still kind of talking about this, this hurd here. So cellulose it's in all plants. The best way to describe it is probably, it's what makes up the plant's cell walls. So this is going to be something that you're going to find in any plant. And a simplified way to think about it is that cellulose is, what it's storing up for us is energy from the sun. So if you're able to capture that cellulose, you collect the crop as your yield, and you take this cellulose and the cellulosic energy, you can actually then convert that cellulose into energy that we can utilize. So essentially we're taking energy from the sun, the plants are converting it into a form of energy that we can utilize to make our lives easier, whether that's ethanol, biofuels, or whatever. So let's see, so cellulose. So cellulose is also I don't want to get too far into this. Now, see, with every definition, you can look up each one and that will take you into multiple little rabbit holes. So, I mean, you can look up cellulose as a sugar, as a polysaccharide. You can look up a lot of different things, and each one of these vocabulary words, I'll go over it a little bit, but I do encourage you to do some searching and look up that information, because there's a lot of different topics that you can go down, a lot of different rabbit holes. So cellulose, when we think about it from a hemp standpoint, is the herd, and we would want to use this cellulose to make energy. Now you can also use it to make composites. That's more along the lines of building materials. I have an example. This is not really, I would say, a composite. It may be. A composite is defined as, you know, taking multiple different, you know, particles of multiple different products and combining them together into one thing. So when we think of composites in the hemp world, we're thinking about mixing it with something to create something like a car parts, auto body parts, or plastics, you know, and when you're molding things like that, you can mold it into anything. So if you make a chair out of composite material, you're blending different materials together and you're fashioning it into a chair. And there are some very cool hemp composite chairs out there on the market. I can't remember the name of the company, but they're out there. And at this point, maybe it's still just a prototype. But these are things and avenues in the hemp industry that haven't really been hit hard yet. And that will come as the excitement over CBD starts to fade and people start to think more about all the different things you can do with hemp. But for now, composites are few and far between, and there are some good examples out there. So search them up, run down those rabbit holes. This is a good lesson for rabbit holes, because you can almost hit every single vocab word and look at different aspects of it. So this is a core board, is what it says on the back. This is from Sunstrand, which was a fiber processor in Louisville, and it's not exactly what I'm talking about, but it's a good way to kind of show what you can do. This is what I would call this press board, or we talked about what we would call this, maybe like something like I don't know, wood paneling or whatever. But anyway, so what is our next? We talked about cellulose. This is a composite. Okay, so biomass. So I put, and I'll probably go from biomass to, I don't know, the next three words are almost, it's an entire conversation on its own. But so when we say biomass here, what we typically are thinking of is any form of plant material that's going to be used to create energy. And then that energy, that fuel that we are making, we would call that biofuel. So when we're talking about biomass here, just at Kentucky Hemp Works, but also every other industry really refers to it as biomass. You know, you can have biomass from soybeans. Biomass is any leftover plant material that can be used to produce energy. And so when we say biomass, we're typically talking about leftover waste material. And because all of our waste material is from hemp, we're not talking about trash, we're just talking about plant material that we don't have a use for, so waste. Doesn't really mean there's anything wrong with it, especially if you can make diesel fuel out of it. So, so biomass in the industry, in the hemp industry or the cannabis industry, biomass has become the term used for what we call floral material, and that's just the flower of the hemp plant. So it's used sometimes in two different ways, and that can be confusing. And that kind of thing is one reason that I wanted to do vocabulary, because it was suggested that, you know, we have people asking questions about different things, but they're using the same word to describe them. So they're just two different things. Not saying that one is right and one is wrong, but when you're thinking about what is the definition of it, well, it depends on who you're talking to. So in the hemp industry in general, people will say, I have biomass for sale. And that generally means that they have hemp that's been grown out in the field, that they've collected the flowering tops of that hemp plant and dried it down. And in some cases, they've ground it up into more of a powder form so that the trichomes are more accessible. But in a lot of cases, it's just the floral material. Sometimes they'll shuck it off of the stalks with their hands, just kind of run their hands down the stalk and just rub off the floral material. But that's referred to as biomass quite often. So we feel like it's important to make that distinction between the two. We can say it both ways, but when we're saying it, we're usually referring to biomass as in plant material that's going to be used to make energy. And but we totally understand when you say biomass and you're looking to sell your floral material. So I guess I kind of already defined floral material, which is the next on the list, but I put it on there because I wanted to make that sort of differentiation between how we say it and, you know, what we're talking about. So floral material would be any of the plant material that we consider to be flowers. So here we go. Just a nice little picture of it. This is printed on hemp paper. But any of this leaf material, and you know, honestly, vocabulary in the cannabis industry is so wishy-washy anyway, because you know, some people would make the argument that this isn't flowers, that these little balls that come off the male plant are actually flowers, and these ones that we harvest off the females aren't flowers at all. And that's, you know, totally justified, because I think so too. But I don't know what else to call the buds. So we either call them buds or floral material, just because it's sort of standard, you know. But I think probably within the next 5 years or so, we will see real solid standards for everything in cannabis. You know, you're gonna have a standard definition for biomass and a standard definition for biofuels when you're talking about hemp or floral material or whatever. So, okay, so the next thing, we have biofuel ethanol. And I guess this is a good, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I was trying to think about what order to put all these in so it would be most comfortable to go from one topic to another. But I guess biofuel and ethanol, this is a good time, because the biofuel is something like diesel fuel that you would get from your biomass. So I mentioned that. We also can make biofuel from seed oil, which I will go into further down the list. But biofuel is essentially fuel made from vegetables or plant material. And you know, I talked about Rudolf Diesel before, who built the diesel engine. The diesel engine was built so that farmers would actually be able to grow their own fuel. And you know, that sort of concept or that principle of educating everybody from a young age to be able to grow their own fuel never really took in this country. For some reason, we aren't taught in schools how to make biofuel from the waste materials on our land. But that's really what the diesel engine was designed to do. And if we had been doing that for the last, 80 years, we'd probably be in a lot better situation than we are right now. But it is a type of fuel that we can use for many things: transportation, heat, and light, and all that. The next type of fuel being ethanol. Now, ethanol is fuel that's created from plant sugars, starches and carbohydrates. That particular type of fuel, it's possible to make it from hemp. So I won't get too far into ethanol by itself, because around here our ethanol is made from corn. But if you were going to use hemp to make your ethanol, then we're actually back to this cellulose material. So I think there's only a couple of cellulosic ethanol plants in this country. It's sort of a newer, probably a lot more expensive technology to actually take cellulose from that form and convert it to methanol or convert it to ethanol. It's much easier to convert to methanol than it is to ethanol. So if you want to have it in that form where it's usable, you have to be able to convert it. So new technologies, new opportunities. Anywho, so trichomes. All right, so now I'm getting into back into the plant material. We're at the top of the plant. So trichomes, I mentioned, I know I talked about this in a previous video, and I showed a little picture. They're those little mushroom-shaped balls that are on the tops, on the end, like it's all over the leaf material of the plant. So they're on the surface of the plant's leaves. That's the word I was looking for. On the top of the surface. On the surface of the plant leaves, these little, they look like little mushrooms, like a stalk with a little ball on the end, and they're really just resinous outcroppings. So it's this little resinous, sticky material. They're very, very tiny, but when you run your thumb down the whole plant, that sticky material, you can actually feel it on your fingers. So you're actually breaking those trichomes off, those little mushroom-shaped hairs. They're almost like hairs, but you're breaking those off, and that's where you get all your cannabinoids. That is made up of, your cannabinoid material, which is, it's made up of your cannabinoid material, your terpenes, your flavonoids. So the terpenes being what gives it the smell, the flavonoids being what gives it the taste. And the point of these sticky resins is not to, get people high or not to treat anything, but it's actually to catch pollen in the air so that it gets pollinated, so the plant can reproduce and produce more seeds. Now we can use that because God put everything here for us to use. So we collect those resins and we use them to produce lots of other things. So trichomes, cannabinoids. So cannabinoids are part of what's in the trichomes. Those are compounds that are specific to the cannabis plant. They're cannabinoids. That's what they're named for. We have an endocannabinoid system in our body that is a series of receptors that actually accepts cannabinoids. And those cannabinoids, we're talking over 100 different cannabinoids. Out of them, THC and CBD are the two most common, although several new ones like CBD, that new one, CBN, CBG, and acids. Won't go into too much on that because it's a huge, huge, huge topic. So I'll never stop. I'll be here all day. So crude extract is when it's just a rough draw out of those resins and a collection of those resins. Lots of different ways to do this. I won't go into all of that. But whether you're using a solvent, you're using pressure, whether you're using physical just rubbing of the plant, there's old-fashioned ways. You can use ice and cold to actually break off those trichomes and collect them. So lots of different ways to do it, but what you end up with is a crude extract. That is going to have all of your good stuff in your plant. It's as close to your raw form as you're going to be able to get. If you can't just go out into the field and get fresh cannabis whenever you want, then probably the next best thing is to get it just where it's collected, and then you're able to consume it somehow or another. Distillate is when you take that crude extract and you run it through there's again different ways to do it. What our partners use is a short path distillation, and that is basically taking this crude extract. So actually I have some here. This is a federally compliant extract, just FYI. But this is just basically a raw extract. It's very goopy, very sticky. I should have grabbed something I could poke in here to kind of show you, but I don't want to mess that up either. So you can see it's not dumping out. It's like molasses that's green and gets everywhere. So the distillate is when you take, or distillate, depending on where you live. It's when you take this crude extract and then you break it down into its different components. And you collect the one that you're shooting for with your equipment. The distillate is going to have the waxes removed, any of the extra, chlorophyll and things that are just naturally present in the plant. It's also the same way that you get isolate and terpenes, which are the next things on my list. So when you're separating, you're kind of taking your raw crude form and then you're separating it out into the different components. So you have distillate, which is all your cannabinoids. You're still probably going to have a lot of terpenes and things like that in there. Or you have isolate, which I have a little example of here. And it might be a little hard to see, but what you can see is that it's a powder. I have a little stick here. So it's a powder, and isolate is just a way to explain that it's CBD that has been isolated from the rest of the extract. So you could have, isolate really meaning isolate, you're isolating that one thing. We call it isolate, but it could be THC isolate. So if you have pure or 99.99% THC, that's THC isolate, CBG isolate, anything that you are isolating. When we use it here, we're typically talking about CBD isolate. Just as a side note, the nice thing about isolate in its powder form is that it's water soluble. So if you're looking for a recipe, or you want to cook with it or something like that, or you want to add it to a drink, isolate is usually the way to go. Whereas with the crude extract or any of the distillate, it's very sticky. It's going to be very hard to work with as an ingredient. So we are getting into more ingredients now, which is awesome because we're going to have some amazing cooking dishes to share with you in the very near future, maybe tomorrow. So getting into ingredients. Now, crude extract, distillate, those can be added to something as an ingredient. Isolate is much easier to add because it's a powder. Terpenes are basically essential oils of the plant. So terpenes are going to be just what's in this original raw extract that you separated it out, but it's just the essential oils. It's what gives it the smell. Now, the fun thing about terpenes, as I mentioned in our previous, baking chocolate chip cookies, the fun thing about isolate is you can take just a very, very small amount and use it to puff up an entire dish with the fragrance of cannabis. So who wouldn't want that? But again, this is one of those things that you should do some more research on because there's multiple rabbit holes you can go down. A lot of people like to cook with it, and we're excited. We have some fun, amazing and talented chefs that are going to be, they're playing with it right now. Let's just say that. But terpenes, you can go into the food aspect of it. You can go down to the aromatherapy aspect of it. You could even search on your own as to whether or not there are any medical benefits to just the aromatherapy alone or the ingestion of terpenes. Those are the kinds of things you should research for yourself. So moving down the list, we have seed oil. So I have seed oil and CBD oil together. Okay, we're at 30 minutes, so I'm talking too much. But we have seed oil and CBD oil together because it's another very common misunderstanding. The seed oil is the vegetable oil that is squeezed out of the seeds. We take seeds here at Kentucky Hemp Works, we cold press them, squeeze out all the oil, and then what we're left with is seed cake. But CBD oil is often referred to as hemp oil, and seed oil is often referred to as hemp oil as well. So it gets confusing when somebody says, well, do you have hemp oil? And then we do have multiple types of hemp oil. We have hemp seed oil and we have CBD oil, but not everybody does, so it becomes a little bit confusing. So seed oil is what we call hemp oil. When we say we have hemp oil here, this is what we're talking about. Whereas CBD oil is CBD extract or distillate or terpenes or isolate, whatever that is, mixed with some kind of carrier oil, which we also carry, but we use seed oil as our carrier oil. So you're getting both in there. Seed cake is the byproduct of our hemp seed squeezing process. So when we are squeezing that seed out, the oil is dripping out into a pan, and then what's coming out of the front of the machine, kind of like this, like just slowly extrudes out of the front of the machine while the oil drips down into a pan. So that is our seed cake. And then once we have our seed cake, we will grind that up into a powder, and then that's our protein powder. Hemp hearts, which are our newest product, or our newest item, I should say, and also the most fun and easiest to eat of all of the parts of the hemp plant. So these hemp hearts are the soft inside part of the shell. It's the germ of the seed, and hemp hearts are basically just used as food. I mean, we use them as food for humans or animals, typically just humans because they're a little pricier, but they're so good for you. Going into the nutritional benefits is a whole nother video, but it is definitely the easiest way to get your omegas, to get all your hemp seeds in your diet, because they're soft, they're tasty. It's not gritty and crunchy like the hemp protein. You don't have to like sneak it into your food like you do with the hemp protein. You can just eat them right out of the bag. So therefore, just the easiest way to get it in your diet. And then microgreens and smokable flour. So both microgreens and smokable flour are illegal in Kentucky still. But it is time to start having those conversations because they're not going to be illegal forever, and it's really just going to take some sort of backwards minded thinking to get out of the way and let us have good health and prosperity. But microgreens are hemp microgreens are the same as microgreens anywhere else. You know, it's little sprouts of the seeds. In fact, no, I guess I don't have any pictures here, but a microgreen, you're taking a bunch of seeds, you're sprouting them up all together, and then once they're in that sprout form, they're producing all kinds of enzymes that you don't find in a fully formed hemp plant. So these enzymes, and this is for plants all over the place, not just hemp, which is why microgreens are so exciting as a nutrition source. So you're getting all these different nutritional benefits that you don't get from a fully formed plant. Those are gone. Once that hemp goes through its, the process of maturing and growing into a fully formed plant, you're not going to get any of that stuff. So you have to eat it when it's in its little microgreen phase. So when they're tiny little sprouts and those first leaves start appearing on the plant, that's when you want to cut it. That's when you want to eat it. Probably tastes better than the hemp hearts. I don't know. I've eaten a lot of hemp microgreens out in the fields, and there's nothing better. I mean, microgreens are just one of the most nutritious, rich, wonderful sources of food for humans. So hemp being the most awesome plant on the planet, obviously they would have the most awesome microgreens. So And then smokable flower, another topic that needs to happen in Kentucky. It is all of these floral parts of the plant. Actually, it's not all of the floral parts of the plant. It's the best. It's the ones that are actually produced specifically for smoking. So they're going to be grown properly, preferably in a greenhouse, although I think for thousands of years people have been growing their smokable flower outside. But you know, you do want to have it. It's a much higher set of standards than what you would consider for biomass or floral material. But the smokable flower is going to be not just harvested and just dried indiscriminately. Like, you are going to cure it properly. You're going to dry it at the right temperature, the right humidity, and for the right amount of time. And you're going to let it release its little, you know, it's going to go through its whole process. Maybe we get one of those experts on here for all that stuff. But anyway, so that's all I got. I know we're at close to 40 minutes now. So there was a couple of things I was supposed to mention, but I don't really remember. I know that I did want to mention, I did want to mention when I was talking about ethanol, about our hand sanitizer. I was sitting here like, oh yes, let's talk about the definition of ethanol while you have a half a gallon of ethanol and don't even show it off. But this is ethanol from our local ethanol plant, grown by corn farmers around here, processed in hand sanitizer at one of our local distilleries, and then we add hemp seed oil to that. So that was definitely something that I failed to mention. But I did want to mention that, you know, read up on these definitions a little bit, because we are going to have some really talented chefs that are going to be sort of showing us some of their tinkering and what they've played around with recipes. I've seen some pictures. It looks so good. I wish they would come here and cook for me. But just keep an eye out for that and brush up on all your different ingredients. That way you can try those things at home. They'll give you some ideas, and then hopefully you'll be able to use them. So I won't be cooking myself. I prefer to eat the food. So anyway, have an awesome day. We will see you again tomorrow. Thanks for coming.